Roll call, Councilmember King, Councilmember Morrell, Councilmember Jeruso, Councilmember Harris. You have 4 members, you have a quorum. Today, we're having the French Quarter Economic Development District. We're receiving the quarterly budget and expenditure report of the FQEDD Trust Fund. Carly Frank, Executive Director of French Quarter Management District, a report on the physical and operational administration of the French Quarter Economic Development District Trust Fund. And we're also to consider and take action upon any other matters that may properly come before the FQEDD governing authority.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ms. Franklin, floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. Just a quick reminder that 2023 is the second year of this special sales tax funded program governed by a tripartite cooperative endeavor agreement between the mayor, city council, and FQMD. The additional quarter-cent sales tax is mandated to have the first 2 million remittances dedicated to post-certified police patrols. Additional revenues are split between growing those patrols and other public safety programs, including homeless assistance. The ballot language in CEA dictates that FQMD is required to administer for the FQEDD by providing fiscal and operational oversight, as well as making quarterly reports to the city council, and that's why we're here today. So to review the income and expense of the trust fund, you can see that in the second quarter of 2023, the remittances were just over $850,000. This figure is reduced by reimbursement for benefits that were paid out of the wrong account by the city's finance department to the tune of $13,436. Expenses remain low in the second quarter at $379,000. The FQEDD needs the city to fill budget line items. If we look at the budget to actual for the year, our sales tax remittances have exceeded the anticipated budget for 2023, but expenditures are only 52% of the 2023 budget. We'll get into some of those reasons in a minute. So the expenditures are low because several public safety programs in 2023 require the city to fill procurement and hiring. That includes the new streetlights that are not installed, code enforcement inspector not hired, parking enforcement shifts that are not filled, and of course our SPP patrol shifts have a low percentage filled. So what we have achieved in this
Ms.
last
Franklin,
quarter, yes.
stop you right there. You said that, can you go back to the spots that's not filled? Is there a specific reason why these spots aren't filled, that the money's there?
Are you speaking of the code enforcement inspector and the parking enforcement?
Right, I know we've been asking for a while.
We have. This was approved in the budget last year. We had put into that budget and you guys approved a code enforcement inspector. The CIO's office was under the impression that they could fill that with a sanitation ranger. We went back and forth, showed them the budgets, the resolutions to say, yes, this is supposed to be a code enforcement inspector. We compared the enforcement of the code side by side between sanitation and code enforcement to show that code enforcement is what we really need. We already have a sanitation ranger for the DDD and the French Quarter. We don't need to continue to fill that position if they could do what was approved in the deputization. What we need is code enforcement. There are a lot of things that fall outside of the purview of sanitation and VCC that code enforcement could be doing if we had a dedicated inspector. This is a similar model to what the DDD is doing through their ad valorem tax, and this is what we modeled it on. I had a meeting with Tom Mulligan and Lance Cardwell in early July to go over what the delay was and their concerns for continued funding. I believe that if this position is filled and is shown to be successful, there would be continued support for this position. I spoke with Mr. Cardwell last week, reinforced we really do want this position filled as soon as possible. So the delay is on the city side and we keep pushing.
And that's the same for parking enforcement?
Parking enforcement is voluntary overtime. This was budgeted to be for weekends and special events. The staff has opted to only fill 2 weekends of that. It is voluntary overtime. It's not a city position, a full-time position, or required overtime like NOPD would have. Now, NOPD, working with the city, has done some other parking enforcement that expands beyond the boundaries of the EDD, goes into the Marigny, taking in parts of the Marigny Triangle that have had issues, into parts of the downtown development district that have issues. But the budgeted amounts that we put into this specific line item, those voluntary overtime shifts have not been filled. So that's something to think about as we look at budgeting for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, wait, I'm sorry, I have a question. So
Of course.
where are we on the procurement process? And I mean, not you, I mean the city.
Well, there's a few things. The streetlights, we budgeted for 15 streetlights for this year. In the first quarter, we went around with NOPD, Department of Public Works, staff from District C and CAO's office. And we found sites at 9 locations that were hotspots, crime hotspots, and NOPD really wanted to see new lights. It has been held up because the street light maintenance contract with All Star had expired, had to go out for new procurement. I'm not sure where that stands with procurement now, but that's why those streetlights are not moving forward. The other thing is we had hoped to reuse streetlights that were removed to make way for 5G. We've been informed that those will not be available for this installation.
I'm just bringing it up because this is a persistent issue,
Yeah.
and it's unfortunate because this happens to affect Councilmember King's district, but it's a citywide one as well, and we're gonna work to help resolve it.
Right, procurement has been an issue in other things as well, but this was approved last year. Any other questions before I go on? So as I said, streetlights, we found 9 locations. We're waiting for that contract to go through new procurement. The crime cameras have all been procured. Those have been stuck with an electrical issue, again, with All Star. These light poles where they're installing the the crime cameras require a certain voltage of lighting. The contractor Convergent is now working directly with All Star to try to get those issues resolved, but all of the crime cameras have been have been procured. Installation is about to begin. We just met with them on Monday. On a good note, all the license plate readers have now been installed. If we look at the KPIs, these are our key performance indices. You'll note that our app response time has been reduced from 12 minutes to 10. That is a very good thing. Has been reduced from 15 to 12 in the second quarter. Our citizen contacts remains high, exceeding our KPI, as are our business checks. Our percentage of shifts filled dropped from 64 to 54%. It still exceeds our 2022 average, but now that the incentive pay for weekends has gone into place, I will tell you that we are now filling more shifts. So thank you very much for supporting that weekend incentive pay. Now we have other categories that we track, including our app calls received. We're up on that. Other things to note on here is that we did lose another officer assigned to the 8th district in the second quarter. And our person crimes were up in the second quarter from 12 to 18. Now, as we look at our homeless services, now I don't want you to think that new clients being down in the second quarter is a negative thing. That means that Travelers Aid, who provides this service, has now made contact with the majority of our homeless within our neighborhood. It means that there was 11 new people that they hadn't contacted before. So our repeat clients is down, but that's also because we're helping to move people into housing. We still have a major issue with housing in that the state housing office is not taking applications right now. The other major issue is quality, affordable housing. It's $1,002 that voucher will pay for. If a person is 0 income, that has to include utilities. If you try to find units at that price that are quality, that are livable, that make a person feel safer living there than on the street, those units are very difficult to find. So we have a number of clients that have vouchers in hand, and we're just trying to find them housing. And by we, I mean our amazing contractor, Travelers Aid. So as we look into the third quarter, we've got to get that code enforcement inspector hired. Again, I spoke with Mr. Cardwell last week to reinforce that we want to get that put forward and finished. As for the parking enforcement, again, as I identified, that is voluntary overtime. We'd like to understand why nobody's signing up for those shifts. It's good the NOPD is continuing to do other parking enforcement. And we'll look at that in the next budget, see if that's worth considering for next year. The app RFP. This has been an ongoing issue for 1.5 years now. We believe the city now has a RFP that has been reviewed by the agreement monitors this past week. They had some very good contributions to how to round out the security and quality of that RFP. We want to preserve the success of the existing app. We're working with the city's IT department to make sure it's really tight and secure. The other thing is staffing those patrols. I believe that this past month, we managed to fill 75% of our patrol shifts with that new weekend incentive pay. That is wonderful. As the crime cameras come on board, we will begin staffing the pilot at the real-time crime center as a force multiplier for the NOPD. And then the last thing, of course, is the 9 streetlights that we already discussed. So you guys should be familiar with the cumulative budget line items. I'm happy to take questions about that. Otherwise, any other comments you want to share?
I have, any other comments from colleagues? Well, I have 2 questions. None? All right. Did you receive any money from the state HB1 at all?
FQMD did receive an allocation,
Or how much?
1.5 million.
And what is that being used towards?
We have not settled on what that will be used for. It was sponsored by Senator Harris for public safety.
Okay, any thoughts to what that, is that so, any thoughts what that may be used for?
Well, we have other public safety programs FQMD runs, including the Upper Quarter Patrol. We are beginning our budget process right now, as you guys are at the city. So we'll be looking more into that as we go through budget.
And we still have a problem with illegal vending, as you're aware, on kind of taking over in the quarter, and it's really unfair to those who are trying to legally vend or just have restaurants open. And we was told that the log jam is with having post-certified officers, not necessarily an OPD, but just that security arm to walk with the revenue individuals, the code enforcement, safety and permits. Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with our attempts to use non-NOPD post-certified to, again, have a force multiplier. We do use non-NOPD post-certified for the Upper Quarter Patrol. Now, there are certain aspects of that we have to work directly with NOPD because we want to have centralized command within the 8th district in the French Quarter. We don't want disparate enforcement. We want it to be centralized. One of the things that makes it a challenge is that if a post-certified officer is outside of their jurisdiction, they will need NOPD to effectuate an arrest. So in the case where if one of our UQP officers makes an apprehension, they need to first reach out to NOPD to effectuate the arrest. But as for doing patrols, walking, we have done that for majority of this year. And we have worked very closely with NOPD. I know our Supplemental Police Patrol supervisor works very close with the administrator of that program, and it's been very effective.
Well, I was just told that the people who are actually doing the walking, the investigating, the inspecting would prefer to have an armed officer or just some type of police presence, not necessarily armed, but police presence. And NOPD isn't always available. So is that possible to get post-certified officers, not NOPD, just to provide that security for those who are out there?
All the different law enforcement entities have their own process for approving details. So it's just a matter of working with those. We've gone through a great deal of effort to assure that we are having verified shifts and no conflicts of scheduled shifts with our detail shifts. So it is quite possible to have that happen. It's just a matter of working with those different law enforcement agencies through their detail program.
Would you be interested in possibly working with those other law enforcement agencies, constables, sheriff's office to help with those walks?
It's certainly something we can take back to our board and have them discuss it.
Okay, please do let me know because I know that vending is very, very important to yourself and other members of the quarter, residential and business, and how we can help prevent some of that activity. Great.
Right, and this goes to what I mentioned earlier about the sanitation ranger being deputized and their ability to effectuate the citations. Their post-certified officers are trained in de-escalation and conflict resolution. And with the deputization, that has been a challenge for them to feel comfortable going into a business where, or a resident where somebody may be aggressive and feeling comfortable serving them. So deputization has not been quite the panacea we had hoped it would be for addressing these things. But, you know, hopefully some of that training could be provided to those inspectors.
Thank you. That's any other questions, comments, Councilman Green?
Yes, I do have a question regarding the key performance indices of the homeless services category.
Mhm.
I want to understand a couple of statistics because it helps me and helps the public to understand whether we're moving in the right direction or we're moving away from the direction. Could you estimate for me the number of persons that you feel are unhoused who live in the French Quarter?
Oh, goodness. In 2021, we did a comprehensive study of unhoused individuals in the French Quarter. At that time, we were around 125 to 145 in that snapshot. Now, those numbers change with the seasons. So in the summer, we're going to have less because it's so ding dang hot. During festival season, it's going to increase. And the French Quarter is slightly different in that we have,
Where do they go based on your studies during the summer when it's too hot?
they go north where it's less hot.
So they come and go as they have transportation available and they come and go and come back for the fall seasons?
We have
And the
a slightly
festival season?
different population than you would have, say, under Calliope or Claiborne. We have a larger travelers population, folks who come and go with the trains. We have less of the permanent encampments that we see elsewhere in the city. So it's a slightly different situation than I think you would see in your district or Councilmember Harris would see in her district. Those numbers are constantly fluctuating for us. And the other thing is that while we understand there's jurisdictional boundaries, other people don't see that. So they're going to sometimes move from our boundaries to another district's boundaries. And that's why it was so important for us to work with TASNO to have that continuity of services all the way from Calliope through all of downtown into the Marigny and up to the 7th Ward.
So there's no way to measure how many are unhoused as we speak?
Unity, TASNO, all of them will do a point in time study. I think that happens in January, if I'm correct. Yes. So once a year, we take that number, but that's constantly fluctuating, especially in our district where we have a big traveler population.
Unique clients contacted went up to 71. I don't know. Maybe you can explain that number to the public. What's a unique client?
So a unique client, so we talk about contacts. Each time a case manager meets with an individual, that's a contact. How many individuals is that unique client? So a unique client may have been contacted 5 times. Now, keep in mind that a lot of these individuals need a lot of assistance to get through things. So if we're going to say connect them to getting their vital documents, you have to initially contact them on the street. Then you have to discuss with them the process of getting their vital documents, and you have to take them for their vital documents. And then you may use that to help them enroll with their benefits. Each of those counts as a contact, but it's one unique client. Does that make sense? Okay.
No, I tell you what, I'd like to talk to you individually. I have some statistics, but it's, you know, Councilman King is on top of it. I know he's very concerned and the council is very concerned too. When I see numbers like 309 repeat contacts, but then there's no ability to say how many people who are unhoused because of a particular time, I am curious as to what the 309 contacts were. but
Right, the 309 contacts, like I said, that's each time a case manager has a contact with an unhoused person. Again, it may take multiple contacts for that person to get to the next step in the process, and there's so many steps. You know, housing is the goal, but there's things that have to happen before we get to them, to that goal, and getting those vital documents, getting them, the benefits. We've also been able to get 39 people into treatment this year. That is a big step. Now, some of those people don't go into housing. We're able to assist them in getting back home to their family, wherever that might be outside of New Orleans. So again, the contact is the actual point-to-point conversation or meeting between a case manager and an individual.
okay, I may contact you directly.
course.
or through
Happy to
Councilman
talk.
King To ask questions. I'm concerned that we be able to track the assistance that we're providing and the results of that assistance.
Mhm.
While I understand the concern relative to housing, it's also important to recognize that there are many landlords who are concerned about someone who doesn't have a reference, doesn't have a job, maybe is addicted to a substance and not have some sort of service where they're gonna come and service them all the time. And I think that's what we're seeing as much of a problem, because I can tell you that there are a lot of $1,000 units available out there. It doesn't mean that the landlord is gonna accept that if he doesn't know that they're gonna be wraparound services. That's all.
That's true. And TASNO will stay with an individual for 60 days after they're housed, but that ongoing case management, the need doesn't disappear once somebody's in housing.
Right, 60 days is fine, but it doesn't go away after 60 days.
Exactly. And that's something that, I know that Mr. Fields is working on, and
Yeah.
he looks at his strategic plan. But that ongoing case management, there's a reason these people ended up on the streets, and how can we help them successfully live in housing, I think it's important.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? No one? All right, that's it.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
That was second. Councilman Harris seconds. All in favor?
All right.
All ayes, no nays. Motion adjourned. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I see we got, go ahead. I don't want to say anything. I'm just done.
Ready. Start thinking.
See, you got hospital in the house. I'm a fan, that's all.